A black girl fixes a Hells Angels bike and gets fired the very next day. But this isn't just about a bike. It's about a moment that changes everything. In a small southern town where people whisper before they help, one act of kindness sparks a storm of hate. She thought fixing that broken motorcycle was just another job. But the man behind the handlebars isn't who anyone thinks he is. He's got a past darker than his leather jacket, and a secret plan that'll turn her worst day into something no one saw coming. When the town turns its back, the unlikeliest man steps forward, ready to risk his reputation, his safety, and his soul to fight for her. But in a world that burns bridges faster than it builds them, can one act of courage rebuild faith, forgiveness, and maybe an entire town? What did that biker do next that left everyone speechless? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on Cedar Hollow, making the air thick and sticky inside Garrison's Auto and Cycle. Tiana Brooks stood at her workbench, methodically wiping her oil-stained hands on an old red shop rag. The familiar scents of motor oil, gasoline, and rubber filled her nostrils, smells that had become as natural to her as breathing. Through the dusty windows, summer light filtered in, catching the floating particles in the air and creating golden beams across the concrete floor. The whirring of fans did little to combat the Georgia heat that seemed to seep through every crack in the building's weathered walls. Earl Garrison's voice cut through the mechanical symphony of ratchets and air tools. "You're showing off again, Brooks," he said, his words dripping with barely concealed disdain. "Think you're better than everyone else here, don't you?" Tiana kept her eyes focused on her work, letting his words roll off her back like water. She'd learned long ago that responding only made things worse. Instead, she channeled her energy into the carburetor she was cleaning, her skilled fingers working with precision that spoke louder than any comeback could. "Working too good for your own good," Earl muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. A few of the other mechanics snickered, but most just kept their heads down, uncomfortable with the tension that always seemed to crackle between the shop owner and his most talented mechanic. The bell above the shop door jangled suddenly, its cheerful tone a stark contrast to the heavy silence that followed. The atmosphere in the garage shifted immediately, like the air before a storm. Tiana looked up to see what had caused the change. A mountain of a man stood in the doorway, his massive frame nearly filling it completely. His leather vest was weathered and patched, telling stories of miles traveled and battles fought. Tattoos covered his arms, each one looking like it had been earned rather than chosen, marks of a hard life lived on the edges of society. This was Ray "Tank" McAllister, and even Tiana, who'd only heard whispers about him, knew his reputation. The Hells Angels patch on his back wasn't just decoration, it was a warning. Tank wrestled a motorcycle through the door, and Tiana's heart caught in her throat. The Harley-Davidson was a beautiful machine, or had been, before whatever tragedy had befallen it. Now it was scarred by fire damage, its chrome dulled and paint bubbled. The sight of such a proud machine in such sorry shape made something in her chest ache. The other mechanics suddenly found urgent business in the far corners of the shop. Earl stepped forward, his usual bravado somewhat diminished in Tank's presence. "What can we do for you today?" he asked, his voice higher than normal. Tank's gravelly voice rumbled through the shop. "Bike won't start. Need it fixed." His words were as sparse as his patience seemed to be. Before Earl could respond, Tiana stepped forward. "I can take a look at it," she said quietly but firmly. The shop fell silent again, this time with an edge of disbelief. Tank's eyes found her, hard and evaluating. His gaze traveled from her face to her hands, hands that showed the honest calluses and stains of real work, then back to her face. He didn't speak, but he didn't object either. Tiana moved forward, ignoring the warning looks from her co-workers and the scoff from Earl. She knelt beside the motorcycle, her movements slow and respectful. Up close, she could see the full extent of the damage. The fire had done its work thoroughly, but underneath the carnage, she could still sense the heart of the machine. Her fingers traced along wiring harnesses, checking for brakes and shorts. She examined the fuel lines, the ignition system, methodically building a mental map of what needed to be done. Tank stood nearby, his shadow falling over her as she worked, but she remained focused on the task at hand. "Gonna need some time with her," Tiana said finally, looking up at Tank. "Fire damage is extensive, but she's not beyond saving." Something flickered in Tank's eyes, recognition, perhaps, of the same reverence for machines that he himself possessed. He gave a short nod and stepped back, allowing her space to work. The hours passed in a blur of concentration and careful repair work. Tiana replaced damaged wiring, cleaned fouled spark plugs, and carefully restored the bike's vital systems one by one. She worked with the patience of someone who understood that healing, whether of machines or people, couldn't be rushed. The other mechanics cast sidelong glances her way throughout the day, their expressions a mix of skepticism and morbid curiosity. They expected her to fail, to prove that their prejudices were justified. Earl walked past several times, each pass accompanied by a derisive snort or muttered comment. Finally, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the shop floor, Tiana straightened up and wiped her brow. "Ready to try her out," she announced. Tank stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the bike. Tiana moved to the side as he swung his leg over the seat and grabbed the handlebars. The moment of truth had arrived. The key turned, and for a moment nothing happened. Then, with a roar that shook the tools on the walls, the Harley thundered to life. The sound filled the shop, deep and powerful and perfect. The engine settled into a smooth idle, purring like it had never been hurt at all. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Earl had nothing to say. Tank sat astride the bike, his expression unreadable as he listened to the engine. Then, slowly, the corner of his mouth twitched upward in what might have been the ghost of a smile. He killed the engine and dismounted, reaching into his vest pocket. Without a word, he paid the bill Earl hastily wrote up, his eyes never leaving Tiana. There was something in his gaze now, respect, maybe, or recognition of a kindred spirit who understood the soul of machines. The bell jingled again as Tank rolled his restored bike out into the afternoon sun. The shop seemed smaller somehow in his absence, but the tension remained. Earl's voice cut through the quiet like a rusty blade. "You just stirred trouble, girl," he said, his words heavy with warning and resentment. Tiana kept her focus on cleaning up her tools, her movements deliberate and calm, despite the storm she could feel brewing. She'd done her job, done it well, and no amount of bitter words could take that away from her. The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the Georgia mist when Tiana arrived at Garrison's Auto and Cycle. Her fingers traced the familiar pattern of unlocking the shop's side door, her mind still replaying yesterday's events. The quiet of the empty garage welcomed her like an old friend. She had just finished setting up her workstation when the rumble of a familiar motorcycle broke the morning stillness. Her heart skipped a beat as Tank's massive silhouette filled the doorway. But something was different about him today. His shoulders weren't squared for fight, but relaxed, almost hesitant. "Shop's not officially open for another 30 minutes, Tiana said softly, though she made no move to turn him away. Tank's boots scraped against the concrete floor as he approached her workstation. Without a word, he reached into his leather vest and pulled out something small that caught the early morning light. He placed it carefully on her clean workbench, a faded medal, its ribbon worn with age. "Vietnam Service Medal," he said, his voice rough but gentle. "You fixed what no one else could." Tiana's fingers hovered over the medal, not daring to touch it. "The bike means that much to you?" "More than most would understand." Tank's eyes held a depth of feeling that made her chest tight. The morning quiet wrapped around them like a blanket, making the moment feel sacred somehow. Then the front door chimed, breaking the spell as Earl walked in. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Tank. "We don't open till 8, Earl barked, but Tank was already heading for the door, leaving the medal behind. Word spread through Cedar Hollow like wildfire. At the diner across the street, Tiana could hear the whispers over her lunch break. "Did you hear about the black girl who fixed the Hells Angels bike?" Some voices were curious, others dripped with disgust. The waitress, Mary Beth, gave her extra fries with a kind smile, while an elderly couple at the counter made a point of moving to a table further away. Earl cornered her that afternoon, his face pinched with concern that barely masked his prejudice. "Listen here, girl. You need to stay away from that kind of man. Tank McAllister's got a record long as my arm. Been to prison. Ain't the sort you want hanging around." But Tank did keep coming back. Sometimes it was legitimate repairs, a loose chain, a failing spark plug. Other times he'd just stand in the doorway of her bay, watching her work with quiet respect. She began to recognize the different qualities of his silence. Thoughtful, troubled, peaceful. One particularly hot afternoon, Tank appeared with 2 paper cups of coffee from the diner. He handed her one without ceremony and settled his bulk onto an overturned milk crate near her workbench. "My boy," he said suddenly, staring into his coffee. "Died in Iraq, 2004. His voice carried the weight of years of pain. "Trevor was his name. Good kid. Better than his old man ever was." Tiana's hands stilled on the carburetor she was cleaning. She said nothing, understanding that some moments needed silence more than words. "Wife couldn't handle it after I got out of prison. Can't blame her, really." Tank's fingers tightened around his cup. "That bike you fixed? Trevor helped me build it before he shipped out. Last thing we did together. After losing him, that bike was all that kept me breathing some days." Tiana felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you," she said softly, "for trusting me with it." Tank nodded, understanding passing between them like a current. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence, the afternoon heat settling around them like a heavy blanket. That night, Tiana sat on the edge of her bed in her small apartment, the day's events weighing on her heart. The last time she'd prayed had been at her mother's funeral 3 years ago. Since then, faith had felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. But something about Tank's broken pieces calling to her own made her fold her hands in her lap. "Lord," she whispered into the darkness, her voice shaky with disuse, "I don't know if I remember how to do this right anymore, but that man, he's hurting so bad, and something in me wants to help. Maybe that's you calling me back too." The words felt clumsy on her tongue, but something in her chest loosened, like a rusty bolt finally breaking free. She touched the Vietnam Service Medal she'd carefully placed on her nightstand, its surface smooth with years of handling. In its tarnished reflection, she saw both pain and possibility, and for the first time in years, she felt the stirring of real hope. A week drifted by like oil spreading across water, The Georgia summer heat pressed down on Cedar Hollow, making the evenings the only bearable time to work. That's when Tiana and Tank found their rhythm, staying late at the garage after the other mechanics had gone home. Tank would roll in around 6 o'clock, just as the sun started its descent, bringing with him custom parts and fresh ideas. Tiana discovered he had an artist's eye for detail, especially when it came to paint jobs. His massive hands, which looked like they could bend steel, moved with surprising gentleness when applying pinstripes or working on delicate chrome. "My daddy taught me," he explained one evening, carefully mixing pearl powder into black paint. "Said just 'cause something's tough doesn't mean it can't be beautiful too." They worked on bikes that other shops had given up on, transforming rust into chrome, silence into thunder. Tiana learned that Tank's gruff exterior hid a wealth of knowledge about vintage motorcycles, and he found in her a quick study who absorbed everything he taught. The diner across the street buzzed with whispers. Mary Beth, the kind-hearted waitress who always saved Tiana a slice of pie, overheard countless conversations that made her shake her head in disgust. "Ain't natural," one regular customer muttered over his coffee. "That girl working alone with him at all hours." "You seen the size of him?" another added. "Like a bear next to a sparrow." The gossip spread through town like a virus. But inside the garage, Tiana and Tank existed in their own world of tools and chrome and trust. They spoke their own language of compression ratios and torque specifications, of paint codes and wiring diagrams. One particularly productive night, they'd just finished a stunning metallic blue paint job on a restored Sportster. Tank had taught Tiana how to layer the color, so it seemed to shift and dance in the light. They stood back, admiring their work, when Tank noticed something taped to the garage door. His expression darkened as he pulled the paper free. Tiana watched his fists clench, the paper crumpling in his massive grip. She gently took it from him, smoothing it out to read the crude message scrawled in black marker. "Keep your hands off that biker trash." A laugh bubbled up from her chest, surprising them both. "Is that all?" She shook her head, crumpling the note and tossing it in the trash. "Hate's just noise." Tank's face softened, but his eyes held a shadow of old pain. "Noise still hurts," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. They cleaned up in companionable silence, but Tank seemed distracted, checking his pocket several times. Finally, as Tiana was wiping down her tools, he cleared his throat. "Got something for you," he mumbled, pulling out a small object wrapped in oil-stained cloth. "Every mechanic needs their own lucky charm." Tiana unwrapped it carefully. In her palm lay a chrome wrench, small but perfectly weighted. The metal caught the overhead lights, revealing delicate engraving. TB, her initials. "Tank," she breathed, turning the wrench over in her hands. "It's beautiful." He shrugged, but she could see pleasure in his eyes. "Good tools matter. And you're good people, Tiana. Don't let nobody tell you different." Neither of them noticed Bobby Wilson, one of their regular customers, passing by the open garage door at that moment. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Tank giving Tiana the wrench, his mind already twisting the innocent gesture into something ugly. The next morning, Bobby's version of events spread through the diner like wildfire. "Saw it with my own eyes," he declared to his breakfast companions. "That girl's getting paid in biker favors, if you know what I mean." Earl Garrison was having his usual morning coffee when he overheard. His jaw tightened, coffee cup freezing halfway to his mouth. The muscles in his throat worked as he swallowed, his face growing red with barely contained anger. Mary Beth, watching from behind the counter, saw his expression and felt a chill despite the summer heat. She'd seen that look before, and it never led to anything good. As Earl threw down money for his coffee and stormed out, she said a silent prayer for Tiana, hoping the girl's strength would be enough for whatever storm was brewing. But through it all, Tiana kept her head high, just as her mama had taught her. She focused on the work, on the satisfaction of bringing machines back to life, on the quiet understanding she'd found in the most unlikely of friendships. The engraved wrench found a permanent home in her pocket, its weight a reminder that sometimes the strongest bonds are forged in the face of others' disapproval. The following Friday dawned bright and clear, but storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Tank's rumbling Harley pulled up to Garrison's Auto and Cycle, hauling a small trailer loaded with equipment. The chrome tools gleamed in the morning sun as he began unloading them one by one. Tiana stepped out of the shop, wiping her hands on her work cloth. "What's all this?" "Thank you gift," Tank said gruffly, hefting a toolbox. "For everything you've done. Figure the shop could use some proper equipment." Inside the garage, Earl Garrison watched through his office window, his face growing redder by the second. When Tank brought in a professional diagnostic computer, Earl burst out of his office like a bull seeing red. "What in blazes is going on here?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the usual garage noise. Customers browsing the parts display turned to watch. Tiana straightened her spine. "Tank's just bringing some new equipment." "Oh, I can see what he's bringing." Earl's voice dripped with venom. "Been watching this little game for weeks now. You think I'm blind?" "There's no game, Mr. Garrison," Tiana said quietly, though her hands trembled slightly. "I've done nothing wrong." "Nothing wrong." Earl's laugh was harsh. "Running around with this criminal, making my shop look like some kind of biker hangout? You're crossing lines, girl. Been crossing them since day one." Tank set down the diagnostic computer with deliberate care. "Watch your mouth, old man." "Or what?" Earl sneered. "You'll show everyone what kind of animal you really are?" The garage fell silent. Even the buzzing fluorescent lights seemed to hold their breath. Tank took one massive step forward, his shoulders filling the space between tool cabinets. "I said," Earl continued, turning back to Tiana, "you're fired. Get your things and get out." "Mr. Garrison, please," Tiana started, but Earl cut her off. "Now, before I call the police about your friend here trespassing." Tank's growl filled the garage. "Try it." Earl reached for the phone, but Tank moved faster than anyone would expect for a man his size. His hand closed over Earl's wrist, not squeezing, just holding. "Let go of me, you thug," Earl shouted, trying to pull away. "Tank," Tiana said softly. "Don't." But the situation had already spiraled. Someone had called the sheriff, and Dale Turner's cruiser pulled up outside, lights flashing. The sheriff stepped in, hand resting casually on his belt. "Everybody want to tell me what's going on here?" he asked, his weathered face taking in the scene. "This man assaulted me," Earl declared, though Tank had already released him. "That true?" Sheriff Turner asked Tank. "No assault," Tank rumbled. "Just a disagreement about proper respect." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Well, seems to me this is private property, and Mr. Garrison here has the right to ask folks to leave. So why don't we all do that? Nice and peaceful-like?" Tiana had already started gathering her personal tools, her movements mechanical, her face a mask of dignity even as her world crumbled around her. Tank watched her, his massive frame seemingly deflated. "Both of you," the sheriff added firmly. "Now." The rain started as Tiana carried her box of tools home. By the time she reached her apartment building, it was coming down in sheets, soaking through her work shirt and plastering her hair to her face. She sat heavily on the curb, her box beside her, and finally let the tears come. She didn't hear Tank's approach over the rain, only noticed his presence when his shadow fell over her. He stood there, holding his helmet, water running in rivulets down his leather vest. "I'm done," he said quietly. his voice barely carrying over the rainfall. "Done being what they think I am. The monster. The thug." He paused, searching for words. Maybe we could start something new. For people like us. People who don't fit their boxes." Tiana laughed, bitterly, the sound sharp and unlike her. "Kindness gets you fired around here," she said, not looking up. "Didn't you know?" Tank stood there for a long moment, rain drumming on his helmet. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his boots heavy on the wet pavement. Tiana sat there until her clothes were soaked through, until her fingers pruned and her tears mixed with raindrops. Finally, she gathered her strength and her box, climbing the stairs to her apartment. Hours later, as she lay in bed listening to the storm, she heard it, the distinctive rumble of Tank's Harley idling briefly outside her building. When it faded away, she waited several minutes before opening her door. There, tied to her doorknob with a piece of leather cord, was a folded piece of paper. She opened it carefully, reading the words written in Tank's surprisingly neat handwriting. "Second Chance Garage. Tomorrow. Be there." The note trembled in her hands as distant thunder rolled across Cedar Hollow, like the echo of Tank's Harley disappearing into the night. The morning sun cast long shadows across Cedar Hollow's east side as Tiana stood before a weathered warehouse, clutching Tank's note. Paint peeled from the building's facade like old scabs, and weeds pushed through cracks in the concrete. The address matched, but she hesitated, her hand hovering over the rusty door handle. Inside, sunlight filtered through grimy windows, creating dusty beams that crisscrossed the open space. Tank's massive silhouette stood near a makeshift workbench, talking quietly with a lean man who favored his right leg. "You came," Tank said, turning to face her. His voice echoed in the empty space. "I did," Tiana replied, her eyes scanning the warehouse. Despite its neglected state, she could see potential in the high ceilings and wide floor space. "Though I'm not sure why." The man beside Tank stepped forward, extending his hand. "Milo Jenkins," he said softly. His handshake was firm but gentle, his palm calloused from work. "Tank's told me about your skills with engines." Tiana noticed the way Milo moved. Careful, measured steps that spoke of old injuries. His eyes held the same haunted look she'd seen in Tank's, the look of someone who'd seen too much. "This place," Tank gestured around them. "It ain't much now, but it could be something." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "This ain't charity. It's a rebuild. For us, for anyone the world don't want." Tiana walked the perimeter, her footsteps stirring dust. Her mind was already mapping out possibilities. Lift stations there, tool storage along that wall, maybe a customer waiting area by the windows. "How did you find this place?" "Used to be storage for the textile mill," Milo explained. "Been empty 15 years. Owner's willing to lease cheap if we fix it up." Tank watched her carefully. "You don't have to decide now. But we could use someone who knows their way around engines. Someone who sees worth in broken things." Tiana stopped at a workbench they'd already set up. Her fingers traced the edge, coming away with dust. "My mama always said God puts people in your path for a reason." She turned to face them. "Even when that path leads somewhere unexpected." Over the next few weeks, the warehouse transformed. Tiana designed efficient workflows, marking areas with chalk on the concrete floor. They scrounged equipment from auctions and estate sales, old but serviceable tools that just needed cleaning and care. One afternoon, while Tiana was explaining the basics of an oil change to Milo's nephew Marcus, a church van pulled up outside. Mrs. Peterson, who'd never spoken directly to Tiana at the grocery store, stepped out carrying a covered dish. "Thought you all might be hungry," she said, setting the casserole on a newly installed counter. "It's my grandmother's recipe." More visitors followed. Mr. Thompson from the hardware store dropped off spare parts. The owner of the coffee shop brought sandwiches and coffee. Even some of Earl's old customers started showing up, drawn by word of mouth about fair prices and honest work. They came with broken motorcycles, tired cars, and their own broken stories. A single mother with a temperamental minivan. A veteran whose hands shook too much to hold wrench. An ex-con trying to stay straight, but finding no one would hire him. Tank handled the heavy work, his massive hands surprisingly delicate with damaged parts. Milo's quiet presence calmed nervous customers, his methodical approach perfect for electrical systems. And Tiana moved between them all, teaching, fixing, building trust one repair at a time. The warehouse filled with the sounds of work, impacts of tools, the hiss of pneumatic equipment, the rumble of engines coming back to life. But more than that, it filled with laughter, with hope, with second chances. One evening, as golden light slanted through newly cleaned windows, Tiana looked up from a transmission rebuild to see Tank watching her. "What?" she asked, wiping grease from her hands. "Just thinking," he said, "about that first day you fixed my bike. How sometimes the smallest spark can light up the darkest places." Milo limped over, carrying fresh coffee. "Got 3 more appointments tomorrow," he said. "Word's getting around." "Good word or bad?" Tiana asked, thinking of the whispers that still followed them in town. "Both," Milo shrugged. "But mostly good. People are starting to see what we're building here." "And what's that?" Tank asked, though his slight smile suggested he already knew. Tiana looked around at their growing family of misfits, Marcus learning at the workbench, 2 reformed gang members painting a fender, a homeless vet sweeping the floor with fierce pride. "A place where broken doesn't mean worthless," she said softly. "Where second chances aren't just words." The garage hummed around them, alive with purpose and possibility. Through the open doors, the setting sun painted Cedar Hollow in shades of gold and promise, while inside, the light caught the dust motes dancing above their heads like countless tiny stars, each one a spark of hope in the gathering dusk. 3 months passed like a summer breeze, and the Second Chance garage bloomed into something beautiful. The once empty warehouse now pulsed with life and purpose, its walls echoing with the sounds of hope being rebuilt one engine at a time. Tiana stood at the entrance, watching as Tank guided a teenage boy through the basics of changing spark plugs. Her heart swelled at the sight of the massive man's gentle patience, so different from the intimidating figure who'd first pushed his broken Harley into Earl's shop. "See here," Tank's gravelly voice carried across the workspace. "You want to gap these just right. Too wide or too narrow, and your engine won't run smooth." The boy nodded, his face scrunched in concentration as he carefully measured the spacing. They'd started the repair days for teens from Cedar Hollow's youth shelter after Tiana noticed kids hanging around outside, watching the mechanics work. Now, every Wednesday afternoon, the garage filled with young people eager to learn. Some came from broken homes, others from foster care, but here they all found purpose in their hands and respect in their hearts. A young woman pulled up in a weathered minivan, 2 small children peering from the back seat windows. Tiana recognized her from the women's shelter, Sarah, a single mother fleeing an abusive relationship. The van's engine had been making strange noises, but Sarah couldn't afford repairs at regular shops. "Don't you worry about payment," Tiana assured her, helping unbuckle the children. "We'll get you running safe again." She led the little family to their small waiting area, where donated books and toys kept young ones occupied, while their parents' vehicles got much-needed attention. Milo worked steadily in his corner, rebuilding a transmission for a local veteran who'd been sleeping in his car. The quiet man's limp seemed less pronounced these days, as if the work itself was healing old wounds. He'd set up a small desk where he helped other vets navigate paperwork for benefits they'd earned but struggled to claim. The transformation wasn't just in the garage. Tank had started attending Sunday services at First Baptist, slipping into the back pew just as the choir began. At first, people stared and whispered, but gradually they grew used to the sight of the big man with the gentle eyes. Some even began greeting him with shy smiles and tentative handshakes. One evening, after the last customer had left and the tools were cleaned and put away, Tiana sat at her workbench, writing in her journal. She'd started keeping it 3 months ago, filling pages with prayers and thoughts, rediscovering the faith that had sustained her mother through hard times. "Still at it?" Tank's voice startled her. He pulled up a stool, its metal legs scraping against concrete. "Just finishing up," she said, closing the journal. "Writing helps me sort things out, you know? Like talking to God about the day." Tank nodded, his weathered hands clasped in his lap. "Been doing some talking to him myself lately." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. 6 months clean now. No booze, no nothing." Tiana's heart caught in her throat. She knew he'd been struggling with alcohol, had seen the battle in his eyes on tough days. "Tank, that's wonderful." "It's because of you," he said quietly. "You showed me there was still good worth fighting for." Tears welled in Tiana's eyes. "No," she shook her head firmly. "You fixed yourself. I just handed you a wrench." Tank laughed softly, the sound warm in the quiet garage. "Maybe that's all some of us need sometimes. The right tool at the right moment." Standing up, he walked to a wall near the entrance. From behind his workbench, he pulled out something wrapped in brown paper. "Been meaning to put this up?" Tiana helped him unwrap it, a wooden sign, hand-carved with care. The letters stood out in bold relief. "Grace built here." "Milo's been working on it in his spare time," Tank explained. "Thought it suited us." They hung it together, stepping back to admire how it caught the evening light. The words seemed to glow with truth and promise, a testament to the miracles that happened daily in their little garage. "You know," Tiana said, "when you first brought that burned-out Harley to Earl's, I never imagined we'd end up here." "God works in mysterious ways," Tank replied, and the words didn't sound strange coming from him anymore. The setting sun streamed through the windows, painting the workspace in warm gold. Tools gleamed on their hooks, waiting for tomorrow's work. In the corner, a half-rebuilt engine sat like a puzzle waiting to be solved. But it wasn't just machines they fixed here. It was lives, hopes, futures. The sign watched over it all, a quiet reminder that grace wasn't earned but freely given, like a helping hand or a second chance. In this place, redemption wasn't just a word. It was built daily, one repair at a time, one heart at a time, one soul at a time. Cedar Hollow's summer festival filled the town square with the sweet scent of barbecue and the cheerful sound of children's laughter. Colorful banners fluttered in the warm breeze, and rows of bikes gleamed in the morning sun. Everything from rusty cruisers to sleek motorcycles lined up for the charity ride. Tiana stood at the makeshift podium, her heart pounding. She'd never spoken in front of so many people before. The crowd stretched across the grass, a mix of familiar faces and strangers drawn by curiosity. Some of their former customers stood proudly with their restored vehicles, veterans wearing patches that told stories of sacrifice, single mothers whose cars now ran safely thanks to the garage's help. "When we opened Second Chance Garage," she began, her voice soft but steady, "people said it wouldn't last a week. A black woman, an ex-con, and a disabled vet? We weren't exactly what folks around here expected." A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the crowd. But here's what we learned. Grace runs deeper than grease. She paused, letting the words sink in. It flows through broken engines and broken hearts alike. It shows up in the veteran who comes in needing a tire change, but really needs someone to talk to. It's there in the single mom whose car won't start and whose kids need to get to school. As she spoke, she caught sight of Tank standing at the back of the crowd. His massive frame cast a long shadow, but his eyes were soft with pride. Every person who walks through our doors brings their own story of struggle, Tiana continued, but they also bring hope. Hope that something broken can be fixed. Hope that someone still cares enough to try. The morning light caught the Grace Built Here pin on her work shirt, making it sparkle. That's why today's ride means so much. Every mile you cover, every dollar you raise, helps us keep our doors open to anyone who needs a second chance. The crowd erupted in applause, surprising her with its warmth and enthusiasm. Church ladies who once crossed the street to avoid Tank now wiped tears from their eyes. Old-timers who doubted her abilities nodded with respect. As she stepped down from the podium, Tank moved forward through the crowd. In his weathered hands, he held a manila envelope. "Got something for you," he said, his gravelly voice barely audible above the festival noise. He pulled out a document, official-looking with fresh ink and legal seals. Tiana's hands trembled as she read the papers. Co-ownership, equal partnership in the garage, her name right next to his. "Tank," she whispered, emotion making it hard to speak. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep building this dream with me," he replied. "You're not just an employee, Tiana. You're family." She threw her arms around his massive frame, not caring who saw. "Your family too, Tank," she said through happy tears. The crowd around them clapped and cheered, understanding they were witnessing something special. The charity ride kicked off with a roar of engines. Tiana watched from the sidelines as Tank led the parade of bikes through town, his restored Harley gleaming like a symbol of redemption. Children waved flags, and even Earl Garrison, her former boss, stood on the sidewalk with a thoughtful expression. The day passed in a blur of joy and celebration. They raised more money than they'd hoped for, enough to expand their Veterans Assistance Program. As the sun began to set, Tiana and Tank headed back to the garage, their hearts full of hope for the future. But that hope shattered like glass when they pulled into the parking lot. Broken shards glittered on the concrete beneath a jagged hole in the front window. Tank moved quickly, his body tense with protective instinct. A brick lay. Among the glass, a note wrapped around it with a rubber band. Tiana picked it up with trembling fingers. "Stay in your lane," she read aloud, her voice hollow. Tank's massive hands clenched into fists. She saw it in his eyes, the old rage flickering to life, the violence he'd worked so hard to leave behind. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, he looked like the man who'd first walked into Earl's shop, dangerous and unpredictable. The note crumpled in Tiana's hand, but she kept her voice steady. The day's joy refused to be completely erased by this act of hatred. The legal papers in her pocket, her new partnership in the garage, felt like a shield against the darkness of the moment. They stood together in the growing dusk, surrounded by broken glass that caught the last rays of sunlight, turning them into diamonds at their feet. The sign above them still declared, "Grace Built Here," untouched by the violence below, as if reminding them that some things couldn't be broken by bricks or bitter words. The clock read 3:15 in the morning when Tiana jerked awake to the wailing of sirens. Her phone buzzed frantically on the nightstand. 6 missed calls from Milo. Her heart pounding, she answered on the first ring. "The garage," Milo's voice cracked. "It's burning." The words hit her like a physical blow. She threw on her work boots and jacket over her pajamas, her hands shaking so badly she could barely tie her laces. The drive across town felt endless, each red light an eternity. As she turned onto Industrial Avenue, she saw the glow against the night sky, and her stomach dropped. The Second Chance garage was engulfed in flames. Fire trucks crowded the lot, their red lights painting everything in hellish strokes. Tank's massive figure stood at the edge of the police line, his shoulders hunched as if bearing an impossible weight. "Tank!" she called out, running toward him. He turned, his face ashen in the firelight. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice raw. "I'm so damn sorry, Tiana." Together they watched helplessly as firefighters battled the inferno. The heat pressed against their faces like a living thing. The roof collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending sparks spiraling into the black sky. Everything they'd built, the tools, the workspace, the Grace Built Here sign, disappeared into the hungry flames. As dawn broke, the fire finally died. Smoke rose from the blackened shell of their dream. That's when Tiana saw the writing. Crude letters sprayed across the surviving outer wall, racial slurs that made her flesh crawl, and beneath them, the words, "Angels burn too," in dripping red paint. Tank's face transformed when he saw it. The gentle man she knew vanished, replaced by something darker, more dangerous. His hands clenched and unclenched rhythmically. "This is on me," he growled. "My past, my old enemies. The angels never forgave me for leaving." He turned to her, anguish etched in every line of his face. "I brought this down on you, on everything we built." "Tank, no!" She reached for him, but he stepped back. "I have to go," he said. "I have to make this right." "Don't you dare," she said, her voice rising. "Don't you dare leave now. We can rebuild." But he was already walking away, his boots crunching on broken glass and charred debris. She called after him, but he didn't turn around. His Harley roared to life, and then he was gone, swallowed by the morning mist. The fire marshal interviewed her for hours. No signs of forced entry, accelerant used, professional job. The insurance would cover some of it, but the garage had been more than just a building. It had been salvation for so many. By afternoon, Milo found her sorting through the wreckage, trying to salvage anything that survived. His face was grim. "I saw Tank," he said quietly, "at O'Malley's bar, just sitting there staring at a whiskey bottle. Didn't touch it, but..." He trailed off, the implications clear. Tank hadn't had a drink in 6 months. Tiana dropped everything and drove to O'Malley's, but Tank was already gone. She spent the rest of the day searching. Every bar, every motel, every place she could think of. She called hospitals, worried sick that he'd relapsed, that he'd wrapped his bike around a tree somewhere. Nothing. Days passed. The police had no leads. Tank's phone went straight to voicemail. The local news ran stories about the fire, some sympathetic, others less so. A few suggested that maybe Cedar Hollow was better off without that kind of establishment. On the 4th day, exhausted and heartbroken, Tiana returned to the garage. The smell of smoke still hung heavy in the air. Puddles from the fire hoses reflected the cloudy sky, and debris crunched under her feet as she made her way to where their workbench had stood. She knelt in the ashes, not caring about the soot staining her jeans. For the first time since her mother's death, she prayed without holding anything back, without feeling self-conscious or uncertain. "God," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know I haven't been the best at talking to you lately, but I need you now. We need you." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Give me the strength to rebuild this place. These people need it. They need somewhere to belong, somewhere to heal." Her fingers found a piece of metal in the ash. The the small wrench Tank had given her, her initials still visible through the soot. She clutched it to her chest. "And please," she added, her voice barely audible, "bring him home safe. He's family. And family doesn't give up on family no matter how dark things get." She stayed there, kneeling in the ashes of their dream, until the first drops of rain began to fall. Each drop carried a promise of cleansing, of renewal, of hope that refused to die. But the garage remained silent, Tank's absence an ache that no prayer seemed able to fill. The days crept by with agonizing slowness. Each morning, Tiana would arrive at the burned-out garage, hoping to find Tank there, only to face the emptiness again. The charred walls stood like accusations against the sky, but she refused to let despair win. 1 week after the fire, she organized the first cleanup day. Milo showed up early, his limp more pronounced in the morning chill, carrying work gloves and garbage bags. Behind him came 3 teenagers from the youth shelter, kids who'd learned to change oil under Tank's patient guidance. "He'll come back," Milo said quietly, handing her a pair of gloves. "Tank's got demons, but he's got honor too." They worked methodically, sorting through the wreckage. Every now and then, someone would find something salvageable: a wrench, a socket set still in its metal case, a few photographs that had somehow survived in a filing cabinet. Each discovery felt like a small victory. Around noon, cars started pulling up. Church ladies with casserole dishes and sandwich platters, men from the Methodist congregation carrying work boots and shovels. Even some of their regular customers came, wanting to help. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Mrs. Henderson from the Baptist church said, setting up a folding table with drinks and food. "But he never abandons his children." The mayor's black SUV rolled up mid-afternoon. Mayor Thompson, a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes, surveyed the damage with a frown. He pulled Tiana aside, speaking in low tones. "This shouldn't have happened in our town," he said, shaking his head. "I've already spoken to the city council. We're going to help you rebuild. Proper permits, expedited process, whatever you need." Tiana's throat tightened. "Thank you, sir. But without Tank..." "Find him," the mayor said simply. "This place needs both of you." As the volunteers worked, Tiana retreated to the office, or what remained of it. Most of their paperwork was gone, but in Tank's desk drawer, she found an old leather wallet. Inside was a wrinkled membership card from his Hells Angels days. The contact information was outdated, but it listed his next of kin, Claire McAllister, his daughter. It took hours of phone calls and internet searches, but Tiana finally tracked Claire down. She worked as a nurse at Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, 2 hours away. Without letting herself overthink it, Tiana got in her car early the next morning and drove. The hospital was massive, all gleaming glass and steel. Tiana found Claire during her lunch break in the cafeteria. She recognized Tank's eyes immediately, the same intense blue, though Claire's held none of her father's warmth. "Whatever he's done now, I can't help," Claire said flatly, after Tiana introduced herself. "I haven't spoken to him in 15 years." "He's missing," Tiana said, sliding into the seat across from her. "The garage we built together was burned down, and he disappeared. I'm worried he might..." "Relapse?" Claire's laugh was bitter. "That would be typical. He always chose the bottle and the road over family." "The Tank, I know, hasn't had a drink in 6 months," Tiana countered. "He's changed. He helps veterans with PTSD, teaches kids from the shelter about engines. He goes to church now." Claire's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "People don't change, not men like him." "You're wrong." Tiana pulled out her phone, showing Claire pictures of Tank working with the teens, helping at community events, praying with veterans. "He kept your photo in his wallet, all these years. Claire's professional mask cracked slightly. He left us. After Mom died, he just left. Because he thought you were better off without him, Tiana said softly. He told me once that his biggest regret was believing he didn't deserve forgiveness, that he'd done too much wrong to ever make it right. Tears welled in Claire's eyes. She brushed them away angrily, but her hands were shaking. The kids at the garage, Tiana continued, they call him Pop. He makes sure they eat, helps with homework, teaches them skills. One boy was about to join a gang. Tank talked him out of it, got him into trade school instead. She reached across the table, touching Claire's hand. Your father is still making mistakes, still running when he's scared. But he's trying so hard to be better. Claire pulled her hand away, but gently. She stared at the photos on Tiana's phone. Tank's massive frame bent over an engine with a teenager, his rare smile caught in mid-laugh. He looks different, she whispered. Softer somehow. He is different, Tiana assured her. But right now he's out there somewhere, probably thinking he has to handle this alone. He needs his family. Claire was quiet for a long moment, studying the pictures. Finally, she took a deep breath. I have some contacts in the biker community from the ER, old guys who still respect the code. She met Tiana's eyes. I'll make some calls. We'll find him. Tiana's relief was so intense, she had to blink back tears. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Claire said, but her voice had lost its edge. And Tiana? Tell me more about this garage of yours, about what you and my father built together. They talked until Claire's break ended, sharing stories of the man they both knew, the gruff exterior and the gentle heart beneath. As Claire headed back to work, she paused. When we find him, she said, tell him his granddaughter asks about him sometimes. She's 7 now. Maybe it's time she met her grandfather. Tiana nodded, hope blooming in her chest like a flower after rain. Tank was out there somewhere, fighting his demons alone. But now they had help to bring him home. The knock came at 11:30 at night, so soft Tiana almost missed it over the sound of rain. She'd been sitting at her kitchen table, writing prayers in her journal, something she'd started doing again since Tank disappeared. Her hand froze mid-sentence when she heard it. Through the peephole, she saw him. Ray Tank McAllister, looking like he'd walked through hell. His clothes were wrinkled, his silver hair wild, dark circles under his eyes. But he stood straight, steady on his feet. Tiana's hands trembled as she undid the chain lock. When she opened the door, the familiar scent of motor oil and leather hit her, but no alcohol. She searched his face, holding her breath. Didn't drink, he said roughly, answering her unspoken question. Went to Jimmy's bar, sat there for hours, staring at a bottle of Jack. His massive shoulders slumped. But I kept hearing your voice in my head saying, Grace rebuilds. Couldn't make myself pour that first glass. Relief made Tiana's knees weak. She reached out, touching his arm, making sure he was real. Come inside. You're soaked. Tank shook his head. Don't deserve to. Running away again, just like with Claire, just like always, leaving you to clean up my mess. Stop it, Tiana said firmly. She grabbed his jacket sleeve and pulled. Despite being 3 times her size, Tank let himself be led into her small apartment. Water dripped from his clothes onto her linoleum floor. Found your daughter, Tiana said, pushing him toward a kitchen chair. She's going to help us look for you. Tank's head snapped up, eyes wide with panic. Claire, you talked to Claire? She's worried about you. She wants... Tiana busied herself making coffee, giving him space to process. She mentioned your granddaughter asks about you. A sound like a wounded animal escaped Tank's throat. He buried his face in his hands. 7 years old now. Never even met her. It's not too late. Tiana set a steaming mug in front of him. But first, we need to rebuild our garage. Tank looked up sharply. Our garage burned down. Because of me, because of who I used to be. Maybe, Tiana agreed. Or maybe because of who we are now, people who believe in second chances. Either way, we're rebuilding. Together. Ain't nobody gonna help us this time. Town's made it clear what they think. Tiana smiled. You'd be surprised. Pastor Johnson called yesterday, said the church wants to help. The teens from the shelter keep asking when we're starting. Even the mayor promised support. Tank stared into his coffee cup. Why you still believe in me, girl, after everything? Because God's not finished with you yet. Tiana sat across from him. Remember what you told me that first day at the warehouse? This ain't charity, it's a rebuild. Well, now it's your turn to be rebuilt. They sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee, listening to the rain. Around 1 a.m, Tank finally spoke again. Got some lumber in my truck. Been driving around with it for days, thinking about coming back. He met her eyes. If you'll have me, I want to help rebuild, even if it's just you and me. 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, Tiana said. Don't be late. The sun was barely up when they arrived at the burned-out shell of their garage. The acrid smell of smoke still hung in the air, but the morning light made everything look different, like a blank canvas instead of a tragedy. Tank backed his truck up to the foundation, and they began unloading boards. Every piece of charred debris they cleared felt like letting go of old pain. They worked in comfortable silence, measuring and marking where new walls would rise. Around 9:30, Milo's familiar limp announced his arrival. He didn't say a word, just picked up a hammer and joined them. Then came Marcus and Deshawn, 2 teenagers who'd learned oil changes at the garage. They brought donuts and their own tools. By 10, Pastor Johnson appeared in his work clothes, leading a group from the church. Mrs. Henderson from the diner showed up with sandwiches and iced tea. Someone brought an old radio and gospel music mixed with the sound of hammers and saws. Tank stood in the middle of it all, looking stunned. Tiana bumped his arm with her shoulder. Still think we're alone? He shook his head slowly. Never seen anything like this? It's called grace, she said simply. Now come on, these walls won't raise themselves. They worked through the heat of the day. Every hour brought new helpers, veterans Tank had counseled, mothers whose cars they'd fixed for free, teens they'd mentored. Each person added something: lumber, nails, paint, food, or just willing hands. The new framework began to take shape, stronger than before. Tank worked tirelessly, teaching the teens proper building techniques, accepting help from church ladies who'd once crossed the street to avoid him. His rare smile appeared more and more as the day went on. During a water break, Tiana found him staring at the new walls with something like wonder in his eyes. You okay? She asked. Thinking about Claire, he said quietly. About how much I got wrong with her, how much I missed. He turned to Tiana. But watching these kids today, seeing how they look up to us, how they want to learn and build something good, maybe it ain't too late to be the kind of man she needed me to be. It's never too late, Tiana assured him. Grace rebuilds everything, even broken families. The radio played an old hymn about amazing grace, and all around them, the Second Chance garage rose again from ashes, not just a building, but a testament to the power of community and forgiveness. Tank's weathered hands, steady now without the tremor of addiction, helped guide new beams into place. Each board felt like a promise kept, each nail like an anchor holding him to this new life he'd chosen. 3 weeks after the rebuilding began, the Second Chance garage stood transformed. Fresh white paint gleamed in the Georgia sun, and hanging baskets of flowers softened the industrial lines. A new sign, hand-carved by one of their veteran volunteers, proclaimed, "Second Chance Garage, Grace built here," in bold letters. On reopening day, Tiana arrived early, her hands shaking as she unlocked the front door. The morning air held that special stillness that comes before important moments. Inside, everything sparkled, tools organized on pegboards, workbenches gleaming with fresh varnish, even the concrete floor polished to a soft sheen. Tank's motorcycle rumbled up, but he wasn't alone. A line of bikes stretched behind him. Veterans, reformed gang members, church folks on their Sunday riders. They parked in neat rows, creating an honor guard of chrome and steel. "Didn't expect all this," Tank said gruffly, trying to hide his emotion as he surveyed the growing crowd. People kept arriving. Families from church, teenagers from the shelter, mothers whose cars they'd fixed, mechanics from other shops. The parking lot filled, then overflowed onto the street. Someone had set up folding chairs, and the ladies from First Baptist brought enough food to feed an army. Sheriff Dale Turner's patrol car pulled up, and the crowd parted slightly. Many remembered how he'd stood watching, arms crossed, the night of the fire. But today, he walked straight to Tank, hand extended. "Never thought I'd see the day," the sheriff said, gripping Tank's hand firmly. "But you proved me wrong. Both of you did." He nodded to Tiana. This town needed something like this, needed to remember what community means. Tiana spotted Earl Garrison at the edge of the crowd, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable but present. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave a small nod, the closest thing to an apology his pride would allow. She nodded back, choosing grace over old hurts. Pastor Johnson stepped forward with a Bible in his hands. "Shall we begin with a blessing?" The crowd gathered closer as he prayed, asking God to protect this place of second chances and new beginnings. Tiana felt tears threatening as she looked at the faces around her, black and white, young and old, rough and refined, all standing together in the morning sun. When it was her turn to speak, Tiana's voice trembled at first, then grew stronger. "Someone once told me that kindness gets you fired around here," she said, meeting Earl's eyes briefly. "But what I've learned is that kindness builds things that hate can never tear down. Every one of you who brought food, or hammers, or just your belief in what we're doing, you helped build this place twice. First with your hands, then with your hearts." She had to pause, overcome by emotion. "When the garage burned, I thought we'd lost everything. But standing here today, I see we gained something more valuable than tools or walls. We gained proof that grace is stronger than fire, that love rebuilds what hatred destroys, and that second chances aren't just something we give. They're something we live." Applause erupted, punctuated by motorcycle engines revving in approval. But Tank held up his hand for quiet. He disappeared into the garage for a moment. Then the sound of a familiar engine filled the air. Out rolled the Harley, the same one Tiana had fixed on that first day, the one that had started everything. But it wasn't the same machine. The chrome gleamed like mirrors, the paint deep and flawless, every part restored to better than new. Custom touches she recognized as Tank's work accented the classic lines. "This bike brought me here," Tank said, his voice rough with emotion. "Brought me to someone who saw past what I was to what I could be. Tiana, you didn't just fix a bike that day. You fixed me. Showed me there was still good in the world, still reason to believe in grace." He pulled a set of keys from his pocket, the metal catching the sunlight. "This belongs to you now, symbol of everything we rebuilt together. Not just machines, but lives." Tiana couldn't hold back her tears as Tank pressed the keys into her hand. The metal was warm, like a promise made real. She ran her fingers over the perfectly restored tank, remembering that first day when it had been scarred and broken. "I can't," she started to protest, but Tank shook his head. "You can. You earned it. Not just by fixing it, but by believing in me, in this place, in second chances." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause as Tiana swung her leg over the seat, feeling the powerful machine thrumming beneath her. It felt right, like coming home to a place she'd never been before. Through her tears, she saw Tank's rare smile, saw the pride in his eyes, not just for the machine he'd restored, but for all they'd restored together. The garage, their faith, each other, and most importantly, hope in a small Georgia town that had learned Grace could rebuild anything. The Georgia sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and deep purples as it sank toward the horizon. The day's heat finally began to ease, leaving behind the heavy sweetness of magnolia and motor oil in the air. Outside the Second Chance garage, Tank's massive frame cast a long shadow across the gravel as he turned the key in the lock, the familiar click echoing in the quiet evening. Tiana sat on the wooden bench they'd built together, her new helmet resting in her lap. Her fingers traced the curves of the protective gear, still hardly believing the day's events. The restored Harley gleamed nearby, a testament to transformation. "Never thought I'd see this place become what it has," Tank said, his gravelly voice soft as he settled beside her. The bench creaked under his weight. "Used to think hate was all this town knew how to give." Tiana nodded, watching the last rays of sunlight catch on the garage's windows. "Funny how things change, how people change." She smiled. "When I first met you, I thought you were the scariest man I'd ever seen." Tank's deep chuckle rumbled through the evening air. "Was the scariest man you'd ever seen, but you saw past that somehow, saw something worth saving." From somewhere nearby, the sound of the local radio station drifted through an open window. Reverend Johnson's familiar voice filled the comfortable silence between them. "Friends, remember this truth. Grace isn't earned by badge or blood. It's given freely when we choose to rebuild what hate burns down, when we extend mercy instead of judgment, when we offer help instead of hatred." "Man's got a point," Tank mused, looking at his weathered hands. "Never thought I deserved grace. Spent most of my life running from it." The garage's sign caught the last light of day, casting a warm glow over them both. Second Chance Garage had become more than just words on metal. It was a promise made real in grease and sweat and faithful persistence. "That's why it works," Tiana said softly. "Because none of us earn it. We just have to be willing to accept it, then pass it on." She patted the helmet in her lap. "Like this bike. You didn't have to give it to me, but you did. Now it'll help us serve more people." Tank nodded, his eyes distant. "Healing's funny that way. Starts small like a spark, then spreads if you let it." He looked at her. "You were that spark here, girl. Don't let nobody tell you different." The sound of tires crunching on gravel drew their attention. Headlights swept across the darkening lot as an unfamiliar car pulled in, an old sedan with a whining engine and mismatched doors. Tiana stood, setting her helmet aside. "Then we've got work to do," she said with a warm smile, echoing the words that had become their unofficial motto. Tank rose beside her, his massive frame straightening with purpose rather than threat. Together they watched a young woman step out of the car, clutching her keys nervously, clearly unsure of her welcome. The garage's porch light clicked on automatically, casting a warm circle of light. Tools clinked softly inside as Milo, who'd stayed late to organize, moved toward the front. Laughter drifted from the youth center next door, where some of their regular kids were helping with inventory. This was what grace looked like in action. Not just words or wishes, but open doors and ready hands. As they walked forward to greet their newest visitor, Tiana felt that familiar surge of gratitude. Every person who pulled into their lot was another chance to prove that love could rebuild anything, even a small town's heart. The evening air filled with the simple music of service, tools being selected, diagnostic questions asked gently, and the sound of someone discovering they weren't alone after all. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.